Not too long after his high school graduation, as the family was on its way to church, they heard the news of Pearl Harbor. Like so many other young men, Samuel immediately looked to join the military. Little did he know, however, that a plan was being developed by the United States Marine Corps to use the Navajo language as a secure way to communicate during battles. Philip Johnston, a non-native who spent part of his childhood on Navajo, was familiar with the language. He presented the idea of using an encoded form of the Navajo language to the Marines' top brass, and they liked it. In 1942, Johnston and the Marine Corps recruited 29 Navajo men who developed the first 200 words of the code. A short time later, while working construction outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, Samuel became friends with some Marines. A Marine sergeant approached him one day and asked if he was Navajo. After finding out Samuel was indeed Navajo and spoke the language fluently, he asked if he knew any other Navajos who might want to join the Marines. Samuel spoke to some of his friends, and 8 of them, including his younger brother Merrill, joined the Marines and became code talkers. A few weeks later, Samuel and the 7 others found themselves boarding a bus at the Methodist Mission School in Farmington, and they were headed for Camp Pendleton, California.
The nepezat ata na ye get the sling. The Navajo code defeated the enemies.
When the 8 of us boarded the bus at the mission school, we were all excited. We even sang the Halls of Montezuma. There was a crowd of family members and classmates, all of whom came to see us off. Some were cheering, while others cried and waved goodbye. We were leaving the only way of life many of us knew. Little did we know the lessons and skills learned on the reservation would serve us well in both basic training and combat. Basic training was very different from life at home. From the moment we reached Camp Pendleton, we were always training. We were pleased that we were in better shape than the non-native soldiers. I guess our days of hard work on the res had paid off. However, we were not used to the drill sergeants and their relentless yelling. I recall one day when Sarge was in one of his typical bad moods. He seemed somewhat irritated by our ability to withstand the rigors of training. The continued marching, combat drills, the radio school training, and the hours of developing the code, all with limited sleep, did not seem to faze us Navajos at first. One time, we were all standing around with our hands in our pockets, which was common. Sarge thought that we were being too casual and inattentive, so he ordered us to go down to the beach and fill all of our pockets with sand, all of our trouser pockets and shirt pockets. We then headed back to the barracks to have our pockets sewn shut with the sand still in them. This added at least 20 pounds of weight. Hoping to break us, we had to continue our training with the sand in our pockets. Thank goodness he gave up after a week.
The misunderstandings and discrimination often found in civilian life reared their ugly heads in the military as well. While these practices were tempered somewhat because of the bond among soldiers, Navajos, however, were treated differently. Samuel recalled that during the Guadalcanal campaign, one of his fellow code talkers took a ribbing from his sergeant who kept calling him Chief. The code talker finally became fed up and responded with, "If I were chief, we would not be in this mess." While the sergeant found the response humorous, he must have gotten the message. After that, he didn't refer to him as chief anymore. Despite the discrimination, The Code Talkers knew they had a job to do. They were determined to prove that they were capable and that they would bring honor to their people, the Marine Corps, and the United States. Yet the world would not know of their extraordinary contributions and the thousands of lives they saved for several decades to come.
The Navajo everyday language has no alphabet like the English language, 26. Navajo doesn't have it. Nothing in the military terminology, none. Even the personnel of different army, military units. And then we don't have individual countries' name throughout the world in the everyday language.
There are three key elements to a reliable code: accuracy, security, and speed. The Navajo Code possessed all three. The Marine Corps decided to put the Navajo Code to the test. A message was sent using standard Morse code, which took an hour. They sent the same message using the Navajo Code, and the results were unbelievable. It only took the Code Talkers 30 seconds. Needless to say, the Marine Corps fast-tracked its development. However, the Navajo language was not a written language, and it had no alphabet. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, missionaries and traders tried to develop a common alphabet for the Navajo language. But there were many versions, and the alphabet, as well as the spelling of words, could vary greatly. One of the first issues the Code Talkers dealt with was standardizing an alphabet. After a great deal of intense work, they developed and coded over 800 words, as well as Navajo equivalents of English words that did not exist in the Navajo language.
As soon as we heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, my brother decided he needed to tell our grandmother about the attack, so he ran home to tell her. When he explained that the Japanese had bombed Hawaii, she could not believe the Chinese restaurant owner in town could have done such a thing. You see, there was only one word in Navajo for Asians, and the restaurant owner in town was the only Asian she knew.
When I realized my husband was a code talker, I became interested in capturing his story, as well as the code talker story. I wanted to understand everything about these men. I have tried for years to understand the code, but to this day, when I hear a group of code talkers speak using the code, I understand the words, but the words together make no sense.
We had been pinned down on the beach for 2 days with little to no forward progress. While the battle was raging, a U.S. surveillance plane flew over the area. The crew was listening to the messages being transmitted by the code talkers. The radio man on the plane knew the Navajo language, but did not know the code. When the pilot asked the radio man what they were saying, he responded, "Well, sir, the best I can make out is they are talking about having breakfast on the beach."
Since there were no Navajo words for most of the military's weapons, systems of rank, orders, and protocols, the Code Talkers had to be creative. Not only did the Code Talkers have to develop new meanings for many Navajo words, but they also had to memorize the complex coding system. Since there were no notes allowed in combat, mastery of the code, communications, combat tactics, and marksmanship stretched the Code Talkers to their limits. Many of them embraced these challenges by relying on knowledge and skills they had acquired from growing up in the rugged and often unforgiving Southwest.
I'm always anticipating that a bullet's coming at me. You have to point at us. Could be me. Then you start thinking, after that little experience, I did, that I have a duty to assign my life to do this job. Of course, you live with prayers. I did.